Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Runaway Train Sports Podcast. It has been a few weeks. Immediately after, in the last episode, I said I'm going to be doing these once a week after every football game. And as you would believe it, life as an adult human being can get complicated sometimes, and things got in the way every week. But nonetheless, we are back and we are going to be covering kind of where we are at, a third of the way through the 2021 Purdue football season, as well as kind of taking a peek around the other Purdue sports that are going on right now, as there is a lot to talk about. As always, you can find this podcast anywhere, any major podcast, and also in video form over on YouTube. If you just search up Boiler in Texas, you'll be able to find it there. Also available on boilerinTexas.com as always. So it has been a minute, like I mentioned, since we have been released an episode of this show. We did one immediately following the Oregon State win in week 1, talking about how UConn coming up the next week we weren't even going to discuss because it should be that simple. It turns out it was. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the games leading up to Illinois. We will spend some time on Illinois, as that is the most recent game. Purdue takes down UConn 49-0. It went exactly as I think all of us hoped it could, and it was almost a perfect game. I think a lot of us would have liked to cross that 50-point barrier, but when you hold a team to 0 points and you score 49 in the process, there isn't a whole lot to be said about that. Purdue ends up moving on to 2-0 on the season after dismantling UConn. And I think I would have done this on the week of it anyway, but I kind of want to go and touch on different things around the conference each week as well. And so for week 2, obviously the big storyline was the Ohio State-Oregon game. I know it has been a hot minute since even that game took place, but Ohio State ends up going down to Oregon at home and just absolutely just beat down kind of fashion, where it really never felt like Ohio State they weren't the Ohio State you're really expecting to see. Oregon ran over them almost all day. Sure, Ohio State racked up a bunch of yards, but they gave up even more. It's one of those games that you kind of look at and go, maybe Ohio State just really isn't going to be the same Buckeyes team that we've seen of many, many years previous. And I'll peek ahead a little bit. They have not lost since, but it is one of those things where every week you kind of look at them and go, that's not the same Ohio State team that we've seen in previous years. And so I think Ohio State is definitely one of the more interesting teams to follow this year, for sure. So Ohio State goes down in week 2 at home to Oregon in a game not many of us assumed would go down like that. Their freshman quarterback, CJ Stroud, not necessarily struggling, but you can tell it's just not the same Buckeyes offense that we've seen in years past. So, okay. Let's see. What else was week 2 was also Iowa State, was it not? Where Iowa just completely just dismantled Iowa State in a bit of Schadenfreude kind of way. So, week 3 is the one that I don't really want to spend even that much time on. I actually did not, and maybe that's a bit fortunate considering how it went down and all this and that. I did not get to see the Notre Dame game. I was traveling. I was actually, that Saturday, I was on a flight, or in the process of taking flights home. And so I really only saw a few plays in the airport on the way to the gate, and then that was kind of it. And then kind of some recaps afterwards. But Purdue falls to Notre Dame by a scoreline that, from what I could tell, was a bit wider than the game really was. I know Purdue had the ball down 7 in the fourth quarter, and really was just a couple of plays away from, keeping it close and maybe even, giving ourselves a puncher's chance. The defense, I've heard nothing but good things about the defense in that game. I mean, they came to play, but as one of those things, and it always seems to happen, kind of gets run down by the end of the game, and ultimately just gets a little too tired, a little too worn out, and by the end of it, those kind of big plays happen, and with the offense kind of sputtering down the stretch is what I've heard. Obviously, the injury of David Bell is an absolutely huge ticket item there. I believe the Notre Dame game is also, we didn't get to see Trice in the game because he injured himself in practice. I think during the Notre Dame game, Mershawn Rice also went down briefly and did not obviously return and did not play against Illinois. So he also went down with the injury. What else? I can't remember too much. Not that I think I just blocked it out of my memory. But that was a game where I think it was a long shot to win. I think it was nice to see how the game went, maybe minus the last, half a quarter or so. And so after that game, Purdue sits at 2-1, kind of where a lot of people were expecting it to be. So no harm, no foul. Obviously, at this point, though, injuries kind of start to become and rear their ugly heads a little bit. Purdue's top 2 receivers are out. I cannot remember if Doru was out for Notre Dame, but I know that he wasn't there for Illinois. I think he was out for Notre Dame. I could be wrong on that. We'll touch on that here in a minute. But Purdue exits that game minus their top 2 receivers, minus their top 2 running backs. Who else was knocked out? One of their tight ends. There was someone on defense. Trice is out with an ankle injury. And so then you move on to Illinois 2-1 or 2-1. Once again, kind of taking a peek around the league in week 3. Tulsa goes to Ohio State and actually put up 20 on Ohio State, but the Buckeyes obviously end up winning that game 41-20. I think that is another nail in this is not the same Ohio State team we've seen, as Tulsa puts up 20 on them in the Horseshoe. Obviously, the big game of the week around college football was Auburn at Penn State. Penn State ends up pulling that out 28-20, and we will touch on how that win aged for Penn State in week 4. But for now, that was an absolutely big win for Penn State. That was their annual whiteout game, and they end up coming out on top over the SEC against a bit of a Schadenfreude, a little clown fraud Auburn team. Nebraska traveled to Oklahoma, and Nebraska actually manages to keep it within a touchdown, only losing 23-16. So I don't know if this was a case of Oklahoma overlooking Nebraska or Nebraska absolutely coming to play and just not being able to make the plays down the stretch. But that was a bit of a shocker. I remember I watched that while it was I was able to watch a bit more of that before my flight on Saturday, and so I think that was a very surprising line. Let's see, we already touched on the Purdue Notre Dame game. The Cincinnati at Indiana game, this one was a bit of a pleasure to watch. I did get to see pretty much all of this game as we waited for our flight. Like I was saying, Cincinnati just kind of messed around in the first half, and then down the stretch, Indiana apparently just decided they'd rather just lose by 2 touchdowns, so they kind of just did that instead. Their O-line, just like Purdue's O-line, is less than good, and so they fall to Cincinnati 38-24. Oh, let's see, anything else interesting going around the conference? Oh, Maryland at Illinois on a weird, was that Thursday night game, Friday night? I think it was a Friday night game where Maryland barely pulls out 20-17. We know how that feels. And then Kent State, Iowa, we don't have to worry about those. So after week 3, Purdue sits at 2-1, welcoming the Illinois Fighting Illini to the friendly confines of Ross-Ade Stadium in what many hoped would be a get-right game for this offense to kind of kickstart them a little bit and hopefully get off of the pot a little bit and see what we can do against a relatively underwhelming Illinois team. This is another game we won't spend too much time on, mainly just because not a lot happened. Purdue ends up winning 13-9, scoring the only touchdown of the game with 5 minutes and 44 seconds left on the clock in the fourth quarter. So the game went into halftime, Purdue up 6-3, with their 6 points coming in basically their first 2 drives. And then Illinois only managing the one, I think it was like a 50-something yard field goal, which was very impressive to see nonetheless. But Purdue and Illinois go into the half 6-3. Illinois manages a couple more field goals going into the fourth quarter. I believe it was, I can't remember if it was 6-9 at that point or if it was 6-6. I do believe it was 6-9 going into the fourth quarter, where just nothing seemed to be happening. The Purdue offense was struggling mightily to move the ball. The Purdue defense, you could tell, was kind of starting to wear down. We were hitting that point in the game where, you're asking the defense to do a lot, and they stepped up to the plate admirably. But eventually you need a bit of offense to kind of give the defense a break. Purdue turned to Aiden O'Connell in the fourth quarter to try and jumpstart the offense. O'Connell ended up throwing a couple of picks in the fourth quarter, one back-breaking one in the back of the end zone when Purdue was really threatening to take the lead and kind of potentially take control of the game, and really just deflated a lot of the energy as it seemed in Ross-Age Stadium. But ultimately, with coming down the stretch, they're able to get out there, and Aiden O'Connell finds TJ Sheffield for a 15 to 18 yard touchdown catch and run for the final margin. And then, as seems to be the theme for the season, with about 5.5 minutes left, the defense manages to stop Illinois in their tracks as they had marched down into or near the Purdue red zone on their last ditch effort to overcome that 4-point deficit, which at that point felt monumental, to say the least. And Purdue ends up winning 13-9. This is one of those games where you really just want to burn the tape and move on, but there's a lot of questions that come up. We do lose Payne Durham due to a very hard hit from an Illinois linebacker or safety or cornerback, whoever it was. I think it might have been a linebacker. Just laid an absolute boomstick on Payne Durham, who ended up leaving and I believe is now in concussion protocol, along with David Bell. Branson Dean, I want to say player on the defensive line, also went down in this game. I haven't seen too much on him. I don't know his exact status as of right now, which is either a good thing or a great thing or a bad thing. So we're waiting to hear back on that. And so at this point, injuries seem to be the tail of the tape down the line, because Purdue went into this game without their top 2 running backs, their top 2 receivers, their top cornerback, and someone else. Who am I missing? I don't know. Can't remember off the top of my head. But there was someone else I know on that list where, man, they really seem to hinder the offense in this one. I mean, anytime that your defense is holding Illinois to 9 points, you're hoping that your offense is putting up 20 plus. So to only muster 13 in a very, very ugly offensive day where, man, it really felt like pulling teeth, would have been more pleasurable than being on the offensive side of the ball for either team. But nonetheless, Purdue's 3-1. Purdue's 3-1 on the season, and at the end of the day, that's all you can really ask for. I think I tweeted on the Boiler in Texas account the next day, said, what's the best part about waking up following a game like that? And, it's moving on and enjoying that 3-1 feeling. And moving on to Minnesota. Minnesota coming up next week. That's going to be a very big game now, I think, going into week 5. Then post-Minnesota, I think will be the most important the most important week Purdue's had so far, which is the bye week, which I think will be a really nice opportunity to get some guys healthy, get some guys some rest, hopefully get a few guys back from the injury list. And so hopefully we can get through Minnesota with a win, minimal injuries or no injuries ideally, and then get into that bye week and then let some guys rest and heal up finally after a rough start to the season when it comes to the injuries. So Purdue, like I said, 3-1. Gotta take your little victories where you can. There's a lot of questions which we'll touch on. I think a lot of the questions are going to be pointed forward We'll touch on those here in a moment, but I do want to take the look around the conference for week 4 and kind of hit on the big storylines around the conference from this most recent weekend. The big one I think a lot of people were really hoping for was to see Wisconsin take down Notre Dame. Wisconsin is an interesting talking point this season as they end up falling to Notre Dame 41-13 as they really, really seem to have picked the wrong Wisconsin quarterback to put their name behind, as Graham Mertz is absolutely just not it right now. I mean, I think I saw he threw 4 interceptions in this game. One of them, I believe, was a pick six, at least one. It was a game Wisconsin. This is a season where Wisconsin has an elite defense. I believe I saw, you wouldn't tell by the 41 points, but I think I saw before this game or after this game that they had like the number 3 ranked defense in the country. And their offense is about as complete opposite as possible. They've not been able to run the ball like they've usually have been able to. Their passing game, 4 interceptions. There's that. We already touched on that. And this is just not the Wisconsin teams we are used to seeing at all. Moving on from Wisconsin, it's going to be interesting to follow Wisconsin down the stretch of the season. Elsewhere, Colorado State at Iowa. Iowa wins 24-14, but this was an interesting one as I believe Colorado State went into the half up a touchdown as they really took advantage of some Iowa miscues before Iowa ultimately remembered that they are a top 5 team in the country, supposedly, and kind of finally put the foot on, I'm not even going to say on the gas, but they kind of remembered that, they should win this game. They only pull it out by 10. And so there was a lot of questions to be had surrounding Iowa, who has a very, very good defense. But at the same time, I think the biggest questions they have are around the quarterback position, as Spencer Petras has been absolutely mediocre, to say the least. There are some throws he'll make where he looks fantastic, and then there are others where you kind of just scratch your head and say move on. So I think Iowa does pull out the win, but there's a lot of questions going around that right now as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next week with that one. Villanova at Penn State. Penn State wins, doesn't cover. Penn State is a good football team, not a great football team. Rutgers at Michigan was actually an amazing game to watch, believe it or not, as Rutgers was within a touchdown of a win. I think this was it was one of those games where, into the second quarter, Michigan was up 14-3, and you're kind of expecting them to just kind of run away with it. And then they just basically completely shut down and then really just settled for 6 more points and kind of let Rutgers make it a bit more of a game. This is one where it might be the scoreline was a bit not less indicative of the final score, but at the same time, this is not the same Rutgers team that we've seen in the past, and Michigan seems to really still be trying to figure themselves out as we get down here into the middle of this season. Oh, let's see. Ohio at Northwestern. Northwestern finally, wins a game. Illinois at Purdue. We touched on that. We're not going to touch on that any longer. Nebraska at Michigan State. I'm going to leave. No, we'll talk about Nebraska, Michigan, because I want to leave. I want to leave Bowling Green and Minnesota for last, because that will give us a beautiful segue over into the next section, where we kind of look forward for next week. And so Nebraska at Michigan State. Michigan State had the tale of 2 halves and an overtime before they finally pull out the 23-20 victory over Nebraska in overtime, where Michigan State really decided to. They took the Michigan line of let's score most of our points in the first half and then only score a few in the second half, and then went, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to score all of our points in the first half and then do nothing offensively in the entire second half. I believe I saw, yes, I'm reading here. Michigan State, the Michigan State Spartans, a ranked team, by the way, managed count them, 5 yards of offense in the third and fourth quarters combined. That's an average of 2.5 yards a quarter, and they still end up going to overtime and beating Nebraska. It was an absolute travesty and makes the Purdue-Illinois game almost look like an offensive shootout when it really comes, if you just narrow it into that second half. But nonetheless, Nebraska makes their way back. Actually was leading in the fourth quarter before, once again, special teams reminds you that it is a very important part of the game, and you really need to focus in on those down the stretch, because Nebraska ends up giving Michigan State a punt return touchdown on an absolute miscue that ended up actually tying the game, that actually sent it to overtime, where I can't remember exactly how overtime went. Obviously, Nebraska attempted to score and failed, and Michigan State settled for a field goal for the final margin, 23-20. So Nebraska, once again, close but no cigar. I think it's very hard to tell exactly how good Nebraska is. At the same time, I think this finally might be a bit of the Michigan State that we expected to see this year. While they are undefeated, there are probably even more questions going around Michigan State's second half than other places in the conference. So it'll be interesting to see both of these programs going into next week. I feel like I've been saying that a lot, but it really is true. I'm always interested to see what happens with the teams around the conference, and those two are definitely high on my list of curiosities. Finally, our actual big shocker of week 4, Bowling Green at Minnesota. Oh boy. You want to complain about barely squeaking out over against Illinois. At least you are not PJ Fleck and the Minnesota Golden Gophers, who lost to a team that might have been considered to be the weakest team in the country, one of the weakest teams in the country, not but a year ago. It was rough. I think I saw that this was Bowling Green's first FBS win since 2019. And thankfully, I noticed this when I was watching the game, I was really hoping that it would show up so I could confirm that it would no longer be there. But Bowling Green's last win over a Big Ten team was Purdue back in 2015, I think, maybe. So now Minnesota will hold that title for us ever longer. And so it was a bad loss. It was a bad loss. Bowling Green, I think, was a 30-point underdog. Minnesota was supposed to come into this game and just walk all over them. The Minnesota defense held Bowling Green to under 200 yards of offense. And it really just came down to Minnesota mistakes that really did them in. PJ Fleck decides to go forward on 4th and 1 at their own 29-yard line, gets stuffed, and then guess what? Bowling Green's got the ball on your 29-yard line, or even better field position. And then you have to talk about Tanner Morgan and the quarterback situation going on with Minnesota right now, as coming off of, not but a couple of years ago, he had probably one of the best seasons of quarterbacking that you could have at Minnesota, where he threw for, I can't remember, 3,000 yards or something, like not 3,000 yards. Yeah, threw for 1,500, 2,000 yards, 30 touchdowns to 7 picks, and had an absolutely stacked receiver room that really just made him look very good. I think that's the year he threw for 405 touchdowns on Purdue or whatever, and it was not good. But then going into this game, throws 2 picks down the stretch. I actually tweeted, I was watching the game, and I tweeted during his first of the last 2 interceptions. He threw the first one, and I tweeted, Tanner Morgan just threw the game-sealing pick to hand Bowling Green the win. But then they get a stop, they get the ball back, and he throws another one. And I actually had a guy come into my reply to that first tweet, going, am I on a delay? Because I actually just saw it. And then I had to respond again going, no, he just threw another one. And the second one was worse than the first one, where I think he was pressured and just kind of lobbed one up there, and it was a pitch and catch. I mean, it was a very bad interception. And then Bowling Green runs out the clock, and there you go. That's how you beat Minnesota 14-10. Woo! You could talk about how bad that Illinois game was, but Illinois is much better than Bowling Green. And this Minnesota game has just gotten very interesting. So we'll use this as an opportunity to segue. I'm going to take a quick break, and then we will be right back for this Minnesota preview, as well as kind of a look around the rest of fall sports for Purdue. Stay with me. All right, and we are back now to take a look ahead at Minnesota a little more closely as Purdue welcomes Minnesota in for homecoming 2021. Ooh. And this is an interesting game, to say the least. I think we touched on a lot of the injuries that Purdue was dealing with going into the Illinois game. We have not received much of an update in regards to a lot of the injuries as of right now. I think we'll probably hear about them probably the day this goes up, which I believe will be Thursday, and as well going into the weekend. I think the only thing that we know for sure is David Bell is still in concussion protocol, and King Doru is being held out for a non-injury, non-COVID related medical reason. We don't know much more about that. There's been a lot of speculation that this is something that he's wanting Coach Jeff Brom to kind of keep under wraps a little bit, and so all we can hope for is that it's nothing, super serious, nothing that may put him in any undue danger, and hopefully maybe he gets to come back and play the game he loves. But if it ends up coming out that he has to hang it up, we'd much rather him go on to live a successful, healthy life like that. So we're hoping to hear the best from that soon. But as of right now, he is also out for the Minnesota game. So the running back room still remains on a couple of young, less than experienced guys with Jaquan Cross, the true freshman, and Dylan Browning, out of the backfield, which I think we kind of saw in the Illinois game did not produce a lot on the ground, and probably will not against Minnesota either. And so we're hoping to get any kind of production on the ground. Otherwise, Purdue will be expected to air it out a bit more. Which leads me into the injuries and the receiver room. David Bell still, as I mentioned, being in concussion protocol, and Mershawn Rice, I have not heard one thing or another, quite one side or another, regarding him. So as of right now, we're just going to assume that we're going to trot out the same guys that we did for Illinois. So Milton Wright going to take the number 1 spot, TJ Sheffield, Ramon Yassin, also probably, who had a big game for himself against Illinois, is going to be out there. Jackson Anthrop obviously will be out there as well. And so we're hoping that the Illinois game will be a nice springboard for some of these less experienced guys to kind of get out there, get some confidence behind them, and hopefully they can get out there and have a big game. We're going to touch on the big question mark of the Purdue offense here in a moment. Kind of just want to look into Minnesota a little bit more, and then we'll talk about what Purdue needs to really win the game, and that'll involve the big gray cloud hanging over kind of the program right now, being the quarterback situation. Just to spoil it, but Minnesota, kind of when you look at Minnesota, especially this year. As I mentioned earlier, a couple seasons ago, they really had a pretty potent passing attack, but this year is quite the opposite. In fact, they've returned kind of to their on-the-ground kind of style. Obviously, they lost Mo Ibrahim in the first game of the season against Ohio State, so he is out for the season. So they turned to Trey Potts, who has kind of just picked up the mantle a little bit. They really haven't missed much. So far this season, he's rushed for almost 500 yards and 5 touchdowns, and he's been over 120 yards every game, averaging more than 5 yards a carry. And so as a team, Minnesota's rushing for over 200 yards a game. and that is going to be where they find their success. That's probably where they're going to look to find most of their success, and Purdue is going to have to stop them on the ground because their passing attack is not so much a threat this year, it seems, without the same receiving room that they did a few seasons ago. And actually, I'm seeing here now on this note that it was 2 years ago he threw for 3,200 yards and 3,200 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 7 picks, and as Minnesota went 11-2. So he is having quite the opposite season this year as he did a few years ago. So Tanner Morgan, I kind of touched on him a little bit. Minnesota's dead last in the conference in passing at less than 150 yards a game, and really I see that they've only attempted 72 passes so far this season, which ranks apparently 125th out of 130 teams in the nation, with a lot of the triple option teams kind of really holding it down for those last things. So when it really comes down to it, Minnesota does not want to pass the ball. They would rather not pass the ball, and they're going to try and beat you on the ground, which I think is also how you see them get beaten 14-10 by Bowling Green. Elsewhere on the offense, their offensive line is massive human beings. They have a guy who's 6'9", 380 pounds, which is going to be a big load to try and get around. And so Purdue's front line is going to have they're going to need to have a big game. And, the secondary and linebackers are going to really have to play some solid defense to really stop them. I mean, Minnesota's going to try and run on you. And we saw with Illinois down the stretch, as the defense got tired, Illinois was able to run a little more as the game went on. And so Purdue's defense is going to have to come in, make some plays, and that's just going to be that, and potentially try and even force some turnovers. Purdue hasn't been super fortunate in the turnover margin so far. They have 2, I believe, on the year so far, but their fumble luck has been bottom tier, where I believe I've seen that they've forced 6 fumbles so far this year and have yet to recover one. So hopefully that can change on Saturday, and Purdue will be able to take advantage of those on offense. Peeking at the other side of the ball, when Purdue has the ball, Minnesota's defense is definitely more geared to stop the run, which makes a lot of sense playing in the Big Ten. You want to be able to stop the run. And so I think this is something that Purdue is going to take. Purdue is going to be in, our most talented group is the receiving core. And so if this is a game where Purdue decides just to throw the ball 75 times, I think this would be the game to do it. Minnesota's, secondary is very mediocre, very middle of the road. But at the same time, if they know that Purdue is going to be passing the ball a lot, they may obviously tip their hat a bit. So that's where we say, every week that any production you can get on the ground is good production, to kind of keep the defense honest as much as you can. But really, this is going to come down to Purdue's passing attack versus Purdue's decent passing attack versus a mediocre to decent pass defense. And when Purdue is on defense, it's going to be a stout physical defense against a team that is going to try and run it on you. And so it's going to be a very interesting day, and the first team to blink first may be able to run away with it, I think. I think this game is going to come down to the offenses more than the defenses. Obviously, if Purdue's defense or Minnesota's defense can get involved and create some turnovers or some big plays of their own, that obviously will help. But I think this is going to come down to whose offense is going to show up. I think that after last week, Purdue's offense has the most room to grow. I don't know how much more room for growth Minnesota has specifically. So that is going to be what to keep an eye out on, as well as the injuries. Are we going to get David Bell back? Are we going to get Payne Durham back this week? Those are going to be 2 big pieces that, if we can get them back, definitely opens up the offense a little bit more. There is some certain people on the internet, and I am not saying I'm a part of them, which would like David Bell to stay out of this game as well, even if he is not 100% good to go. They're saying, why not keep him out another week, get him through the bye, get him to absolutely 100%, because if you risk losing David Bell for the season, that is a big hit. And if it costs one game without a semi-healthy David Bell, I think we take those for sure. Now we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the big elephant in the room when it comes to Purdue's offense, and that is the Jack Plummer versus Aiden O'Connell. Who should start the game and who has it right now? And I think that's the big question, because it really seems, and we've seen it a couple of times so far this year, where the offense kind of stalls out and Jeff Brom turns to Aiden O'Connell for a bit of a spark. And you'll see Aiden O'Connell down the stretch. Obviously, last week we saw AOC come in, lead the game-winning drive, and that put Purdue over top. But at the same time, we saw 2 picks. One was a bit more of his fault than the other. His first one in the back of the end zone cannot happen. You cannot turn the ball over in the end zone. I don't care who you are. If you are in that good a scoring position, you cannot turn the ball over in the end zone. The second one was a little less of his fault, as he hit his receiver square in the chest. I think it was Bilodeau, who just had to bounce off his chest straight into a Illinois defender's hands. So that one a little less AOC's fault, but at the same time, those are 2 turnovers that kind of keep your offense off the field. And if they're trying to work stuff out, that's not something you can have. Conversely, Jack Plummer, yet to throw an interception this year, but at the same time does seem a little more hesitant to take those shots downfield. You see a lot of side to side, 3-4 yard checkdowns. He has not been as willing to take those 10 to 20 yard shots, or even those 20 plus yard shots like Aiden O'Connell is. Aiden O'Connell does a 2-step drop, and he knows where he's going. Whether that ends up in the defense's hands or the offense's hands is kind of up to the different situations. But it really comes down to is, do you want the guy who is safe, not going to turn the ball over, or the guy who's going to take more risks but is willing to kind of stretch the field and open things up a little bit more on offense? And I think you see the biggest difference here, and there's a lot of speculation on this as well that I'll kind of touch on, is that when Jack Plummer and Aiden O'Connell get in there, the offense looks totally different. Jack Plummer's offense looks a little more stagnant, a little more 3-4 yard checkdowns, a lot more sideline to sideline. But then as soon as Aiden O'Connell comes in, all of a sudden it seems like we're taking shots downfield. It seems like we're opening things up, attempting to move the ball a little more aggressively. Now, here's the speculation is, are they both being given the same playbook? And if yes, why is Aiden O'Connell more willing to take those shots, and why is Jack Plummer not? If the answer is no, why isn't Jack Plummer getting the same playbook that Aiden O'Connell is? If Jack Plummer can't make those throws, why is he starting? But if Aiden O'Connell was beat out to begin with, what are we seeing in the playbook that shows us why Jack Plummer was the starter to begin with? If they're being given the same playbook, and it's just Jack Plummer is so afraid of throwing an interception and getting ganked that way, where he's taking those 3-4 yard checkdowns and kind of hoping his receivers make a play, I think that's something where you need to work with him and get him more comfortable making those shots. And that's what I've been saying on Twitter for this entire season. Of every year, it seems there's been this pseudo quarterback battle, or a full-on quarterback battle, where he'll use multiple quarterbacks for almost every game. I think Plummer is playing scared because he knows if he makes a big mistake, he will get pulled. I don't have too big of an opinion either way when it comes to Plummer or O'Connell. What I want is this coaching staff to make a commitment to one of these guys and say, this is your offense. Go make plays. If you make a mistake, you'll fix it. Don't have these guys looking over their shoulder. And that's why I think Aiden O'Connell can come in and play so much looser, and I've seen a lot of discourse about this as well, of Aiden O'Connell comes in as the spark guy, knowing he can take more shots because he was already brought in by the guy who wasn't taking the shots and maybe not willing to take those risks. He comes in a lot more loose than maybe a Plummer, who's afraid of making a mistake and getting pulled that way. So Aiden O'Connell comes in, plays a little more loose, throws a couple picks, but knows that doesn't matter because he's taking his risk. He's trying to get something going. Make a decision. Pick one. And then only if in practice do you see something change that you can then see on the field do you make that switch? And you make it in between games, not in between the third and fourth quarter. We've seen this a lot, and I don't know if it's just Brom's style or if he truly just cannot pick one over the other, or maybe there's some disagreements in the coaching stuff. I don't know. Pick one, commit to that one, open up the playbook, play the same playbook for both if you're not already, and let's go out and take advantage of these quarterbacks who are decent to good quarterbacks. It's just frustrating. If it does come down to just Plummer is so afraid to take those chances and make those mistakes, then I think you do go with Aiden O'Connell. But if he's being given an inferior playbook, then you have to ask yourself why. It's interesting. I do think that they will go with Aiden O'Connell this week, because even after the Notre Dame game, Brom still came out and said Jack Plummer is our starter for the Illinois game. But then after this one, he did come out and say that a starting quarterback will be named in practice this week, and we still have yet to hear who that is. So that's my little mini rant on the quarterback situation. Whoever you trot out on Saturday, make a commitment to that person. Leave them in, let them make mistakes, but let them be aggressive. And I think Purdue's offense will wake up. I truly believe that. But that is the Minnesota game. It is going to be an interesting game. It's hard to make a prediction right now, because without knowing the injury details, who's playing, who's not, it's hard to say for sure. I think it's going to be tight. This is one of those games where, unless the offense just comes out completely differently, I think it's going to be a low-scoring, tough, grinded-out kind of game, in which Minnesota is definitely more favored if it turns into one of those, because Purdue's offense is not truly made to grind out games like Minnesota's. So if Purdue's offense comes out like it did against Illinois, I think Minnesota's going to win by +7 points. If Purdue's offense kind of starts to wake up and kind of maybe look a little bit more like it did against Oregon State, then I think Purdue ends up pulling this out for between 5 to 10 points, probably. I think this defense is good enough to let this be a blowout, but I have yet to see recently this Purdue offense play well enough to warrant a multi-touchdown win. So here's hoping. I absolutely hope it happens like that, but we'll have to wait and see. And then Purdue, like I said, gets that bye week, which will probably cannot come at a much more needed time than right now. So that's football as of right now. I'm going to briefly kind of touch on kind of the rest of Purdue sports that's going on right now, because Purdue's fall sports is having an absolute renaissance right now. As you saw on Saturday, there was a lot of tweets getting thrown around about all of Purdue's sports teams right now. Purdue Volleyball is sitting at the top of the Big Ten right now, currently undefeated after taking down number 3 Ohio State at home in 5 sets in an absolutely fantastic volleyball game, which had a lot of people kind of taking notice of Holloway as a tough place to play. And they followed up that win by going on the road to Indiana, defeating them in straight sets for their 14th consecutive Mono and Spike win. They currently sit at 10-1 overall, 2-0 in Big Ten play, and are currently ranked number 4 in the country in volleyball, which is the highest they've been ever rated in the country. And so they are taking some momentum into the beginning of Big Ten play, and there's no reason they probably shouldn't be 6-0, 7-0 to start the Big Ten season. So good time to be a Purdue volleyball fan. And then the metric football, women's metric football team, soccer team, is absolutely on a tear right now as they take. Oh God, I need to look and see, because I don't know exactly their details right now. I'm gonna pull that up right here while I'm sitting here. But they are, I believe, undefeated in the Big Ten as of right now. And so, let's see here. Yes, they currently sit at the top, leading the Big Ten at 3-0, with second place Wisconsin currently sitting at 2-0-1, and Rutgers also sitting at 2-0. So Purdue's women's soccer team is absolutely crushing it right now. They had an absolutely thrilling game against Iowa, I believe, here recently. where they ended up pulling it out 2-1 in a golden goal situation where every goal was scored, I believe, in the final 10 minutes of regulation and then extra time. And so that was an absolutely thrilling match, to say the least. They actually host Michigan. I think the day this goes up on Thursday, they host number 17 Michigan to Folk Field. Michigan currently sitting at 1-0-1. So a win here would be absolutely massive, and it would really set up something special for Purdue soccer, because, man, if you can beat them, you can beat a lot. And then they follow that up with a trip to current number 18, Wisconsin. So Purdue's football team, volleyball team, and women's soccer team currently sit at the top of their respective conferences or divisions, which is extremely exciting and a very fun time to be a fan of Purdue. Hopefully the football team can follow it up, becoming 4-1 with a victory over Minnesota, where they can finally get healthy with a bye. And hopefully volleyball can continue their dominance, as well as the women's soccer team. But I think we will end it there. This has been the Runaway Train Sports Podcast. I hope you all enjoyed it. I would really appreciate a rating, whatever you're listening, whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. Give us a rating. We really appreciate it. We will hopefully be back again I'm going to shoot for next Thursday as well, with a podcast following up on the goings-on of this weekend. And hopefully the Purdue Boilermakers will be 4-1, sitting at 2-0 in the Big Ten West, and we'll all be a little happier. But for now, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week. Stay safe. Enjoy your Saturday. You can find us on Twitter at BoilerInTexas for all lukewarm Purdue takes, as well as some fan emotions as well. But for now, stay safe. We appreciate you all, and I'll see you guys next week.